Welcome back to Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life with Laurel and Laurel. We're here exploring all things inner work, and we're beginning a month of focusing on rituals and practices. And so, our first episode this month is how do rituals and practices create a beautiful life? Help you create a beautiful life, right? So Laurel, welcome. And I'm glad we're here
Hello.
to dig into a new month topic, one that we haven't explored a whole lot on this podcast. And so I feel like if you've been looking for maybe some real ideas about how do I do this work, we're going to have some specifics for you emerging in our next few podcasts for sure. Yeah.
And you know what I love about bringing this conversation to our listeners is, I have rituals and practices,
Mhm.
and but it's not something that I talk about with most people,
Yeah.
right? I mean, when I think about the way that we communicate in our relationships, we're not talking about rituals and practices.
Right.
Um, and then to think about, my experience with rituals and practices growing up through my entire life until a few years ago was really largely associated with religious um, procedures, right? The
Mhm.
rituals and practices that came in religion.
Right.
And it's interesting because it's probably been since I did my yoga training. I have such an expansive view of what rituals and practices can really entail
Yeah.
that some of them can be religious, some of them can be spiritual, some of them can be just, um, I'm going to say, part of your constitution, right? Like, um, who you are and what you need to be functioning at your best.
Yeah. So that's great. So let's I love Laurel where you just went with that, and let's just get right into this idea of what is a ritual and a practice, right? And why do we do them? And
Yeah.
so I love that you just kind of were threaded through, different types of rituals and practices. So the first thing that I would say to our listeners is if you can kind of reevaluate or look at how do you think of a ritual or practice, if it's only in the context of a religious experience or a religious procedure or shall we say event, right? Then you've got kind of right now you have a more of a limited view, right? Of what a ritual and practice is, right? So let's see if we can just invite everybody to get more expansive in the thinking, right? So, any ritual or practice, something you repeat to get a result. I mean, at some level, it's just that simple, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
With intention.
with
Because
intention.
I think this is, for me, it's been, what's the difference between a routine and a ritual? Well,
Yeah,
it's the intention that
right.
you bring to the act,
Yes,
right?
right.
Um, and it is really interesting to think about that. What is the intention behind, let's just say, your morning routine,
Mhm.
right?
Let's
You
begin
know,
there. That's
uh,
great. It's a great place to begin because, we hear it. We hear it all the time. If you haven't heard it, you're not listening, right? The reality is how you begin your day is how you live your day. And
yes.
we have lots of stuff to prove that that's generally true. Yeah.
And so as you go through those activities that you start your day doing, even as, kind of simple as brushing your teeth, and I feel this in my body when I am just going through the motions without an intention, then brushing my teeth is something, it's robotic, it's habitual, it is not a ritual. It is just part of my morning routine. But if I can brush my teeth with my left hand and focus on good, my intention being to improve my overall health, beginning with my oral hygiene,
Mhm.
right? That's a ritual for me.
Yes, yes. And it's self-created, right? So that's the other thing about rituals and practices to give them meaning, to have value. to them and to feel like you're living a meaningful, valuable life, all in all, that is made up of these rituals and practices, we have to be the ones to give them meaning, bring intention to them, and then feel like we're also enjoying them at some level, even the
Yes.
ones that we're doing that might not have a lot of joy in them in the moment. Like, how do you bring some level of enjoyment?
I
Yeah.
can't wait for an example. What do you have in mind when you say that one?
Well, I feel like for me, uh, physical exercise can come to that place where it's like, oh, this is such a chore, you know? And so the way that I've worked with that is to change up my routine over time, right? To not repeat the same thing over and over again unless I'm loving it, you know, if I'm really enjoying it. And then having the variety helps keep me present to why I'm doing it and remembering, right? Reminding myself and paying attention to how I feel afterwards and how a continued routine of it overall, how I feel better in my life, like anchoring into the result rather than being so focused on the part where it's another thing that I feel like I need to do. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think you can bring that level of enjoyment and intention in every, menial task, right? When I think about the way that we cook or the way that we sit down and eat a meal, or even getting into a car to go to drive somewhere, like, how can you create intention and enjoyment and turn something that is otherwise a responsibility into a ritual?
Yes, yes. So when we think about, you know, rituals and practices creating a beautiful life, you know, we're beginning here with this idea of taking some of your routines and your rituals right now that you have. Number one, re-engaging with them in a more conscious way to see them as a routine and maybe to elevate them into more of a ritual state where it feels like, you know, you're doing it in a more full presence, conscious way to elevate your life experience overall, right?
Yes. And what just came through for me is in doing that, in taking, something that might just be a routine task and creating a ritual from that. You mentioned presence, right? Mindfulness, right? Like bringing more presence, but it really requires us to slow down. And I think for me, that is why when I consider something a ritual, it feels that much more nourishing for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because I've decided it's a ritual. It's because in deciding it's a ritual, it forces me to slow down and be more present in the moment. And that creates a more beautiful experience for me.
Yes. Yes. So, Laurel, some of the rituals or practices that you have that you feel like have brought you to a more elevated life experience, right? That have brought you into a space where you feel like you have a beautiful life, right? Can we start to talk about some of those specific ones that we each have, maybe,
Sure.
to give ideas and examples for people as they begin to explore? Yeah.
Sure. Um, One of my morning rituals is to sit in silence, um, with a warm cup of beverage. My morning beverage of choice is coffee. And so sit in silence and have my hands on the warm cup
Mm.
and really feel kind of the warmth that I'm holding and the maybe safety of the silence around me. So that's one of mine.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. And so you see, these are, as we begin to explore some of this, right? Some of them are small, momentary experience, but also something that you do on a regular basis that reminds you to be present to the moment, to be engaged fully in the moment, to appreciate, you know, life and yourself in the moment and whatever it is you're engaged with. Um, And this is what creates the beauty of an experience rather than rushing through it mindlessly and not really being fully engaged with it and feeling like, what did I just do? On the other side of it, right? That
Mhm.
isn't going to give you that feeling of, wow, I'm living this creative, beautiful, rich life
Yeah.
experience, right?
Yeah. What
Yeah.
about you? What's one of yours that you might share?
One of the ones that was coming up for me, and it's not a practice that I've done consistently ever, but I do it periodically. And I'm not really sure, it's as I talk about it, I'm not really sure what prompts me to re-engage with it. But I love it when I am engaged with it. And it's walking outside, making sure I go outside before I go to bed and say goodnight to all of life, looking up the trees near my home and putting my feet on the ground and just reflecting for a moment on my day and what I loved about my day and saying maybe a word of gratitude. Um, and it's so easy, I think in our lifestyles that we live for many of us, and depending on the weather, we may or may not step outside and really feel like we are a part of the great world that we live in. Um, and so for me, that's when I re-engage with that practice and I do it regularly, I don't know, I just feel like more connected to that greater world out there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I
a
love that
beautiful
one.
one. That's a beautiful one. I have been known to do that as well when often I'm connecting, saying goodnight to the moon, connecting with the moon, feeling the vastness of the stars above my head
Yeah.
and knowing that other people on the planet are doing the same thing at the exact same moment, right?
Mm, mm,
And that is just such a beautiful ritual.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
beautiful.
yeah. And I experience rituals. Some I have that are routine and frequent, right? Part
Hmm.
of my daily life, and others that aren't, right?
Hmm.
And so when I think about at home in Concord, um, I have a space in my office that is what some people might call an altar, right? Where I have um, a few candles and an acorn and a piece of sea glass and a little statue of Ganesh and
Hmm.
different, a laughing Buddha, right? And
Hmm.
and this is where I sit in the morning there. When in the winter months when I'm there, I sit on my squatting stool, I light a candle, I sit in silence, and it's just part of that day for me. And my first experience creating an altar for myself to bring into my home was during my yoga teacher training. And Lisa, who ran the program, and that was part of the first weekend together, she asked us to create an altar at home. And at that time, now this was in 2019, I'm going to say my spiritual practices and rituals were very private. And so the thought of creating an altar in my home was like, oh dear, who's going to question what I'm doing, right?
Hmm.
What are my children and husband going to say about this wacky behavior?
Yeah.
And so I created an altar. It was a portable altar for myself. And this might be a great thing for our listeners to do if they
Yeah.
want a place where they can sit down and start forming or living into rituals.
Hmm.
It was a bread plate, a long rectangle serving platter that was maybe 2 inches wide by 5 inches long. And it was portable. So I could
Hmm.
put what had meaning, my sea glass, my acorn, whatever it was, a feather,
Yeah.
um, even a crystal, right?
Hmm.
And I could put that, but I could just put it on top of the bookshelf or put it on top of my dresser. But when I wanted it in the morning, I would bring it out, place it on the coffee table, sit where I needed to sit.
Yeah.
but it's a really nice practice. And I know, that you have places in your home that when you go into, there's the ritual is asking for you to engage right there.
Right, right. Um, yeah, so as our listeners are exploring this idea of altars, so altars is a beautiful ritual or practice to help you come into the moment, to honor something, to make a special sacred space to honor something in your life, and to remind you, to me, it's a reminder of what you really care deeply about, what you love, and what you want to bring into, say, an elevated spot in your world, right? So, as Laurel was talking, I was thinking about how I know her as a person that just really reveres nature, loves Mother Earth and all that she provides for us. And so, your altar, as you described it, was filled with all these like little pieces of natural elements, right? So for each of us, that it's different, depending on what you're feeling really connected to, or what you want for inspiration, what you want to give good attention to and love to in it for a time. An altar can be something that you set up and then you dismantle. I know, for me, I've talked about this before on the podcast, that oftentimes when I look around my house, I feel like everything's an altar now. People come in and they think my house is so tidy or whatever. But for me, it's like I'm really engaged with my space in a way where it's an extension of my beautiful life, right? And so messiness, clutter to me is energetically disruptive to having a natural flow, right? And so I'm really self-aware and in tune with keeping things in a space that feel like they keep me awake and aware and alive and connected and in good order, so to speak. And I think that, for each of us as we explore this journey, that's one way for you to just experience your home and your space around you. If you're looking for a beautiful life and you want rituals and practices to help you get there, right? Use your home as an altar space or a space to keep you awake and in touch with what you want and how you want to be living. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I love about that is it just make or reminds me that it's about creating a space that when you are in that space, you have more presence of mind. And I don't mean thoughts. I mean you have more, mindfulness of where you are in the moment, right? And your home is one of those places where, rather than rushing through, how can you create a space in your home that when you walk into that space, it calms you. You are present. And I had a practice. I'll say it was a ritual because I used to do it frequently, back when I was working in my corporate career and I was on the road a lot, like 500 to 700 miles a week. I was in my car a lot. I developed a ritual of driving in silence with no radio,
Wow.
and bringing my awareness to my surroundings. And so I
Mm.
worked, in an area in the state that was pretty rural. Um, I wasn't driving up the interstate highway.
Yeah.
So it gave me the ability to be present and focus on the trees around me, maybe a bird flying above, things that weren't distractive when I was driving,
Mhm.
but really made me be present in my surroundings.
Yeah. And in the
And
moment. Yeah.
yes, and I need silence in order to do that, right? Another ritual I have is I don't take a bath very often. My vision self takes a bath every night, but I don't do it. Um, but when I do take a bath, I light a candle, I
Mm.
put on soft music, I have my bath pillow, and it is a ritual of relaxation for me.
Yeah. I think rituals and practices ultimately are the gifts we give ourselves, to help us create a beautiful life. And I know that I want to come back to, we didn't really directly hit this, but, when we're developing practices and rituals that feel really good and enriching to us, and the people around us don't relate to them or are uncomfortable with them, integrating that into your life is a process. So I just want to, remind our listeners that if you begin to do this, part of it is having the confidence to say, look, this is just something that I'm experimenting with and exploring and seeing how it makes me feel. And, if it bothers you, let me know, but, I'm going to give it a go and communicate, a little bit about what you're doing. Cause I think that we're coming from a time when, rituals and practices were often considered, shall we say, when they were done by women, were considered, well, people were hung for them, for many
Right.
years, right?
Right.
And so they were considered bad news. And if that's still lingering in our beingness, that's a fear, then to begin to experiment with them a little bit can sometimes feel a little nerve-wracking. And I think we're growing into a time where we know that a lot of what happened was very unfortunate, generations ago, but it did happen. And we're the only ones that can change it is by claiming, we want to live a different way now.
Yes. And I also think that we can bring rituals and practices that to our families, to our, in our relationships, right?
Yeah.
That are, when I think about, sitting down for a family meal, right?
Yeah.
You know, many families probably don't sit down anymore for a family meal. And of those that do, many probably aren't saying grace or thanks before they eat, right? We
Yeah.
do this as part of a holiday ritual.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you at my Thanksgiving table, there is a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but how can you bring a ritual to your family? When I think about the ritual I had with my children growing up that was very strong from the time they were little, is their bedtime ritual,
Mm-hmm.
right? Was more than a routine because it wasn't just a story and a kiss goodnight, but it was our ritual of happy thoughts where we shared what we were happy, what made us happy,
Yeah.
um, for 15 minutes with each other before they went to bed.
Yeah.
That was a ritual. It had meaning. It brought beautiful things to
Mm.
us individually and to our relationships and to the bedtime,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. So, again, it's that idea of elevating, right?
Yes.
Creating these experiences where we interject something new or bring new intention or new meaning to it in order to have an experience that we want to be more mindful of, that we want
Yes.
to engage with, and to recognize, right, the value of it. And so, sometimes we don't recognize the value of it until we've practiced it for a while, right? So even just that idea of, with your children, creating a happy thoughts, appreciation time, right, is something that, I'm sure has impacted them in a lifelong way. And yet you don't really know that until you actually do it, So trusting that inner sense of, this feels right for me. I feel good about doing this, even if it's doesn't feel right for the people around me, or the people around me are saying that I'm weird because I'm doing it. I feel good about doing it. It's trusting yourself and knowing
Yes.
that that's your exploration to be had. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I love that you brought up that there may be some fear or worry about judgment from others. And I
Mhm.
brought it up too, right? Creating an altar in my home and worried about that. But there is, the legacy, if you will, of women who were judged and persecuted because of their practices, right? And we're really, I mean, I'm excited to live in a world where there's less judgment and persecution, but of course it's still out there. And so surrounding yourself with other people who you trust and who respect you and allow you to bring those practices back into the world is really beautiful.
It is. It is. And I want to say, here in Richmond, I have a circle of women where we get together monthly and we do full moon fire time together. And it's one of those things that I know, people who have judgments around that or don't understand it will call it something that it's not. For us, it's a time where women are getting together, we're supporting one another, we're getting in touch with the elements. We're getting in touch with, the sense of being connected to the greater energy of the elements of the world and nature itself. We're giving time, setting time aside every month to give gratitude to the elements for what they provide for us. And we're doing personal inner work where, we're in connection with the rhythms and the cycles of nature, right? So one of the cycles of nature is the waxing and the waning of the moon, and we know energetically that during a full moon, right, we're at the kind of the height of the energy of that experience, that planet's influence. It's the closest planet to us, and then as it wanes, right, that energy begins to wane. And so it's a great time for release work, right? So oftentimes when we're doing fire ceremony, we're putting something into the fire that we want to release. We're asking for, support, right, from the elements in the world around us. There's all this personal connection to the ritual and the practice that really is about how you're doing it and what it means to you personally. And so it's so important, as we begin to develop this quality of life, that we find our own comfort with it and we enjoy what we get from it, and not worry about what other people don't or do understand about it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I can't wait to attend one of your fire circles.
Oh, I know. I'm looking forward to you being here one full moon. Yeah.
So I don't want to go on too long, but I do
Yeah.
want, I was thinking
Yes.
about your incantation jar.
Oh,
And when
yes.
I visited you last, I had never experienced that.
Yeah.
And after being with you and learning about that, I created one at my own home. So tell our listeners about that, because that's an easy ritual that
Yeah.
our listeners could incorporate into their beautiful life.
That's beautiful. Excuse me, I was thinking about, for some reason this came up for me towards the end of last year, that I really wanted to have a space where I could have clients when they were in my home, or for myself or family, right? If they had some intention that they wanted to hold, something that they were working on in their life, that they would actually write it as an affirmation and put it in my incantation bowl, right? In the space where, for me, it's on my altar. I walk by it. I ask for everyone's highest good, the who puts a thought or an affirmation in there, to be fulfilled, and so that I allow spaciousness around the shall we say, the manifestation of whatever it is that they want to have. And when I was reading about incantation bowls, this idea of having one, right? One of the histories of it is, it was an actual bowl that many years, probably centuries ago, right? People would, when they were building their home, they would write words that they wanted their home to contain, so let's say love, or let's say connection with God, fulfillment, earthly delights, right? Healthy bodies, right? And they would bury that under the house when they built it. So it was the foundation of their home, right? And I love that idea, like exploring some of these old rituals and practices are really fun, because we can bring them up to date in a way where we go, okay, well, what could my incantation bowl be all about, right? Yeah.
Yes. And I started one after I visited you, and my ritual was to, daily put something on paper, put it in the bowl, and then at the full moon, I would take the contents of the bowl and create a little fire in my yard, even in the snow, and just light those strips of paper and release them to the moon as a collective group of, my intentions, what I want to bring to life.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And mine will all go to fire too. as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the solstice. And
Yeah.
so, no, again, it's like, how do we release, right? How do we do this work? One of the beautiful things about ritual and practices is the doing of it and then releasing and the trusting that it's bringing us to that elevated place that we seek, or more fulfillment, more self-expression. It's all just part of this experience of being human here on the life, in our life,
Mm.
and being a soul in a body, having a human experience. Yeah.
So good.
So good. So yeah, so invitation for journaling. I think, what comes up for me right off the bat is just looking at your habits and your practices. What are your practices and your rituals right now? If you're not calling them rituals, but they're just habits, routines, practices, doing like a little, daily noticing, write them down at the end of the day for a while. What did I do? So you can kind of see what you have and then begin to explore ways to elevate it, bring them up to a more, uh, a place where you can be more mindful in them and enjoy, have more pleasure in them. Right. That's how it will
Yes.
create your beautiful life.
Yeah.
How about you, Laurel? What
Um,
suggestion for our listeners
I
today?
think I'm going to go to your inventory.
Mm,
You know, the
mm,
inventory of what is it that you currently do as part of your daily routine, right?
yeah.
And are there things that you do that unknowingly are rituals? Do
Yeah.
you, that you already bring some intention to? Um, because I think sometimes we do it without realizing that is what we're doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, a great challenge to yourself is picking something, a routine that you have that you really are bored with, or it feels dry, or you don't really want to do, and inviting yourself to explore that. And how can you bring it to a place where it's something that you begin to want to do, right? How can you change it? How can you transform it through your intention, through meaning, through some sort of shift where you're bringing it to a place where you really feel like, wow, now it's a part of my life that I really enjoy or want to, or feel the result of and feel good about, right?
Yes, right. Even if it's not something that you do every day,
Hmm.
but when you sit down or move into the space where you're going to take on an activity,
Yeah.
you know, how can you make it enjoyable and special and nourishing, right?
Right.
I mean, I
Right.
do this with my own journal writing. I've been keeping a journal for decades, and I don't just write. I create a space in which I write, right?
Right. So that's great, Laurel, because I was thinking about that with journal writing with people, like people that are regular journal writers. How do you make it special? So you just spoke into that. I'm going to give a great example of bringing ritual into something that oftentimes is a really dreaded experience for a lot of people. And that would be monthly paying your bills.
Yes.
How can you create a beautiful ritual around that, right? Where you really come to appreciate and enjoy the experience. So I'll give a couple elements and everybody can go out and kind of play with that a little bit. But one is just making it organized and orderly, right? So if it's haphazard and it's messy and you don't have a system, create a system that feels more orderly, like you have control of it. Because if you don't feel like you have control of it already from the beginning, it feels like something you don't want to do, right? Then make it special, get a special cup of coffee or a tea, or go out and buy yourself a latte and come home and, do your bills and enjoy your special drink, right? Something like that, light a candle. Bless every check that you write or every bill that you pay. Give thanks for what you got for it, right? Bring mindfulness into your experience of the give and take of a monetary exchange so that it doesn't feel like a burden or something that doesn't feel in your control. Bring it under your control, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
That's a really good one,
that's a great one.
right? Turn on music that lifts your
Mhm.
spirits, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's so
I
many
love
good
that.
ideas.
I
So many good.
know. I know.
Okay. Off we go for now. We'll be back for more beautiful work, beautiful life, more exploration of rituals and practices in the month ahead.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. Okay. Thanks, Laurel.
Bye.
Bye.